Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is Scott Bradfield. I wanted to talk a little bit today about a writer I read when I was a kid. I used to read him with my mom. I just recently published a piece. I'm going to put a link below here to a piece I'm quite proud of. Was really hard to write, which was about it's the Los Angeles Review of Books online, so you can see it for free. And I wanted to write. I like to write occasionally personal essays about reading, which is all the bathtub talks are about. And that's why I don't care about. It's not graduate school, so if you want to do research or correct people on what happened and what literary devices are being used in books or how to pronounce people's names, you can do that at grad school. This is just for readers, okay? So the books I read as a kid were books that my mother loved because she was the one person in my family who really read a lot of books for herself. And that's what the piece was about. I mean, my dad used to read to us a lot, but my mother was the one who actually seemed to enjoy books, and I kind of wanted to share that enjoyment when I was a little kid. She was always having fun with books, and it was that pleasure in books I remember her passing on to me. She loved these books. They were written by Erle Stanley Gardner. You should know who he is. He wrote the Perry Mason books. And when I was a kid, they were everywhere. Perry Mason was on television because he was being rerun. He was one of the first shows to go on syndication, so he was on all day, it seems. And then and then the news shows were on, and then books were everywhere. Erle Stanley Gardner was this incredibly prolific mystery novelist who wrote 3 to 4 novels a year, usually 2 of the Perry Mason books, which are the best known, and then 2 under the name A. Fair. That was a pseudonym. It was the least pseudonymous pseudonym in the history of literature because it says Erle Stanley Gardner writing as A. Fair. And I don't know why. It was some contractual deal or something so he could publish with 2 different series. The Perry Mason books are actually better than you might think. And if you go back to read them, they're actually quite, if you like a certain type of solve it mystery, Agatha Christie type mystery, Erle Stanley Gardner was very highly regarded in that genre by everyone in the field, including Raymond Chandler, who was a big fan of his. And Raymond Chandler, who could not plot a novel to save his life, was quite enamored of the plots of Erle Stanley Gardner. Erle Stanley Gardner said he would spend basically a day or 2 plotting a novel, and then he spent 2 or 3 days talking the novel into a dictaphone to his secretaries. He had 4 secretaries who traveled with him everywhere. I think he married one of them eventually. He's a really interesting character who's been completely forgotten in some ways because he was so famous. He was the most popular writer when I was a kid. He was everywhere. Much more popular when I was a kid than Agatha Christie, who now has kind of eclipsed him. That's a long preamble to say that A. Fair was a very different series from the Perry Masons. The Perry Masons were sort of standard. He was the hero. He was the book Perry Mason's a much tougher guy than Raymond Burr. He's always getting in fights, and he's a real tough. He's a bit more of a hard-boiled character than Raymond Burr, who's a Mr. Gentleman all the time. But basically, people would come to him, and he would solve the crime, and everyone would go home. These books, and he was a good guy, basically. The A. Fair books are about a pair of detectives, Bertha Cool and Donald Lamb. And they usually will say on the cover, yeah, I remember as a kid, I loved this, a Donald Lamb, Bertha Cool mystery. I don't know why I liked that. It was like, oh, this is a special type of mystery. I remember writing my own little books as a kid. I'd say the Bob Johnson so-and-so mystery because it was immediately telling you you're part of this big series of books. So I remember seeing these. They all came in these digest-sized paperbacks. They were all over my mom's room when I was a kid. And they're still, you can pretty much get these fairly cheap today in fairly decent condition. They often had some great covers. I'm trying to remember the artist, Bob McGinnis. I got to read this. And please don't tell me I'm wrong. Bob McGinnis, who did these kind of classy digest covers. This is late editions, by the way, of the A. Fair novels. And I'll give you a quick summary of these. Bertha Cool is basically, she's an overweight woman. She's loud. She's brash. She's kind of dirty. She doesn't trust human beings. She's always trying to rip everybody off, especially her clients. Donald Lamb is a guy who she calls the runt because he's actually quite small. I mean, I think of Alan Ladd whenever I think of this guy. But he's handsome, and the women like him, and he can't fight. He's always getting beat up because he can't really fight. And there's one book where Bertha takes him out and she hires some special, I think a sumo wrestler or some special wrestler, judo master to teach him to protect himself because he's constantly getting beat up. The Bigger They Come is the first of the series, and Erle Stanley Gardner writes 2 or 3 of these a year for 30 or 40 years. There's a lot of them, and they're kind of fun to read in sequence, as I did for writing this piece, because basically Lam meets her. He doesn't have a job. He's a former lawyer who lost his job because he figured a way to murder somebody and get away with it legally. And he made the mistake of telling somebody because he's very clever with legal trickery, like Perry Mason. And according to the biography I read, Erle Stanley Gardner used to use all these crazy shenanigans in courtrooms when he was working in Ventura. And he was always doing these tricks on people or the court system and trying to show how clever he was. So anyway, Donald Lam loses his job and has to become a detective. And he starts working for her. For Bertha. Bertha's constantly ripping everybody off. She's big. She's really the star of the series. She's very funny. She's raunchy. She's selfish, and of course, as always, has a heart of gold in the middle of it all. Donald Lam is kind of the brains of the two, and of course, every time he gets hired for some sort of simple job, people start getting murdered. And in the course of the book, Lam is always figuring trickery to lie to the police. So he's not just, he actually is lying. They're basically a couple of con people in many ways. And they often are dealing with con people. So there's lots of con men. Gold Comes in Bricks is about a fake gold mine scheme. I can't remember all the different, there's an auto insurance racket. There's a lot of different rackets that they get involved in, and Donald Lam and Bertha Cool are always going in there, kind of messing things around, lying to the cops, and trying to figure ways of making money. I mean, Bertha is not beyond thinking of ways to actually blackmail her own clients. That's how bad she is, and they're the heroes of the series. Rereading through them, they're really quite charming, still fun to read. They have a couple provisos for that, which is that Gardner just plotted these things to this. They're almost like little Rubik's cubes. So you often, on some of the weaker books, you have long passages of exposition telling us who murdered and how they did it and what they did. But the fun parts is the way Donald and Bertha interact, and then Donald's relationships with the women he meets and some of the gangsters he meets. They're very well written. Really smart, really quick. He sets up a scene so quick and smart, and you're really in these places. And when you meet people, the characters and their voices just snap to life. Some of the favorite ones. I mean, the first one is great. I think the first one is really worth reading. Here's the other one. What got me into doing a piece? Hard Case Crime. He does some wonderful books. Published this this is hard for me to believe. It's called The Knife Slipped, and this was the lost Cool Lam novel. This is hard to believe. Gardner wrote so many books. He published this. He wrote the second book in the series, and Bertha's even nastier than she is in any of the other books. And she's constantly talking about herself. Bertha wants to cut herself a piece of cake, which means she's trying to get some money out of somebody. And the knife slips means she screws herself. She cuts herself in the course of the book. This book was actually, Gardner just swept it under the rug. It's a really good book in the series, really worth reading, and is kind of a nice picture of where we could have gone, and that this really anti-hero detective duo could have gone even more anti-hero than they already went. Double or Quits is a really good one. I like that one a lot. And then there's one point in one of the books, Donald Lam gets sick. It's in World War II. It started, so Donald Lam gets fed up with all the lying and the cheating, and he just basically walks away from the business and goes and joins the Navy or the Marines, I forget. And he's gone for 3 books or 3 or 4 books. In the course of those books, I think Bats Fly at Dusk. There's at least three books where Bertha is left by herself, And instead of having first person Donald Lamb telling the story, we have third person following Bertha Cool. This is one where she's asked, a blind man comes to her and wants help. And she basically says, well, you got money. I don't care if you're blind or not. If you can pay my bills, it's fine. So she works for this guy. And in the course of these 3 books, Donald Lamb operates as this kind of deus ex machina, or this Donald Lamb ex machina. And basically you never see him except every once in a while he sends a telegram to tell Bertha what to do and what ways to kind of solve this crime. And they're very interesting little spins out of the normal comfort zone of the series. Gardner is a really adventurous little novelist, and he's really worth checking out. Again, with the problem, some of them get going along too long. Fool's Day on Friday, I didn't read. This was one of Chandler's favorites, and I recommend all of those. Certainly try the first one, The Bigger They Come, and The Knife Slipped is a rediscovered novel which deserved to be rediscovered. A lot of rediscovered novels should never have been rediscovered. This is this is one of the best books in the series. Okay, we'll see you next week. I'm going to put a little when I post this, I'm going to put a little link to that piece, which I'm quite proud of because it's trying to deal with why I like the books personally, and then what the books do when you read them, I think. Okay, happy bathing. Bye.